Summer can be such a tricky time for parents of differently wired kids. Finding ways to keep kids active and learning over the break, whether at home or on vacation, it can be hard. Fat Brain Toys is a family-run business that has been curating and creating quality toys, games, and gifts that both entertain and educate for more than 20 years. Almost all of Fat Brain's toys and games are screen-free, and what I love about them is they encourage kids to get creative and explore the world around them through open-ended play. I'm especially drawn to this really cool product called Mr. Bendy. It's a sturdy yet bendable figure with posable arms, legs, and eyes. It comes with wax bendy sticks that you can use to turn Mr. Bendy into really anything, an astronaut, a guitarist, a pirate. And you can play it as a game with the sand timer and game tokens, or you can set those aside and just engage in open-ended play to explore things like spatial reasoning, creativity, and observation skills. I think what I love most about Mr. Bendy is it offers an easy and fun way for parents to connect with and support their neurodivergent kids in exploring social and emotional learning. Also, you know that I love a mission-driven company. Well, Fat Brain Toys is made up of families who want to make life better for other families. It was founded out of the desire of two parents to provide better play experiences for their kids, so their aim is to support you in doing the same. Fat Brain is a new sponsor of Tilt Parenting, and they've put together a collection of toys for our families. Go to www.fatbraintoys.com/tilt to get 10% off all the items in the Tilt collection when you use the code TILT at checkout, and find out for yourself why Fat Brain Toys is a smarter way to play.
You don't have to be a mental health professional to have mental health conversations. And any one of us could be the person that someone turns to, just like I was as the art teacher. And you could be the coach. You could just be the aunt or uncle. You could be the parent. You could be anybody. And are you ready for that? Do you feel prepared to guide someone in the right direction?
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. As my guest said in the episode you're about to listen to, you don't have to be a mental health professional to have mental health conversations. In fact, I would say that talking about difficult mental health topics outside medical settings is not just helpful, it's necessary in that it both normalizes mental health challenges and reduces the stigma that's often associated with such struggles. Author and illustrator Cara Bean also knows this to be true and is committed to exploring these topics through her art, specifically comics. Cara sees comics as a powerful tool both for teens to learn about mental health and for parents to lean on for important conversations about complex topics. That's exactly why she wrote her new book, Here I Am Me, an illustrated guide to mental health. Every chapter in this therapist-recommended book explores a different aspect of mental health, from the brain and the mind to feelings and emotions. And by portraying complex neuroscience concepts with this cast of illustrated characters, Cara offers this really accessible, approachable understanding of what's going on in the brain that truly empowers readers. I really love Cara's book, and so I wanted to have her on the show to talk about her process for writing it and how we can use it to support kids going through hard stuff. So in this conversation, Cara explains the way she visualized thoughts and feelings, why she felt so strongly about including detailed brain science in her book, and the power of metaphors to explain the impacts and struggles of things like addiction, depression, anxiety, and suicidality, making these heavy topics more relatable and easier to understand. Cara provides interactive workshops on creativity with people of all ages and backgrounds in various public forums. And when she's not teaching, she makes comics that delve into poetic self-introspection, playful storytelling, and topics relevant to teens and teaching. So now, without further ado, here is my conversation with Cara. Hey, Cara, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Debbie. Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about your book and your work. And I've already read your formal bio, but I always like to hear from my guests in their own words to learn a little bit more about what you do in the world. And I always love to know people's personal why for their work.
Yes, I was a high school art teacher for about 13 years in Lexington, Massachusetts. And I ran a classroom and I drew with students every day. Not very long into my career, I realized that mental health was a huge part of teaching at a high school and would come up in the art classroom quite often. And you're always encouraged as a teacher to pursue professional development. And I didn't want to learn anything more about art. I felt okay with my own knowledge base on that. But what I didn't know enough about was anything to do with mental health. And I found that especially maybe my more shy or artistic students, the creative kids would kind of choose me as their safe person to talk to. And I was ill prepared and wanting to serve them better. And so I kept learning about mental health at any opportunity or workshop. And you should also know that I'm a cartoonist and I draw comics and I doodle constantly. I was just drawing right before we started. So when I take notes, when I'm really trying to learn something, I draw it when I really want to absorb something. And so when I was learning about depression and suicide and anxiety, I was drawing everything that I was learning. And those pictures and notes became interesting to other people besides me. And people thought, wow, that's it. Can I borrow that? Or those are great notes. Or can I photocopy that? And it started to be, this was probably like 12 or 15 years ago. I just realized it was something I was doing that was interesting to other people. And over time, I created little pamphlets or zines about it. And someone challenged me about 6 years ago or 7 years ago if I could create something that spoke directly to kids using comics. And it took me a really long time and a lot of help from many brilliant people and experts and practitioners. But I created this book called Here I Am Me, an illustrated guide to mental health, which uses comics and visual metaphors to talk about mental health. So it's interesting. It came out of the art classroom, but it is very much my best communication skills, I think, are through my hands and hopefully my heart. And so that's a little bit about me.
Such a great story. And I'm curious, were you always someone who learned through drawing when you were a kid as well?
Yeah, I was just looking through some old letters I'd written to my father and I was reading, I'd gone to graduate school and I was telling him about how intimidated I was about this one class and how hard it was and how I was just going to draw everything. And I was like, wow, I've always done, this is my go-to of understanding. And I think I do have some dyslexia, was not diagnosed or when I was in school, but I think I did struggle to learn. And so when it was real serious and I absolutely wanted to get it, I would draw. And I often like rewrite information that I like. I'll write it in my own handwriting. And that's another way that I kind of process and understand.
Yeah, that's so cool. Let's talk a little bit more about the art form of comics or doing graphic novels. I mean, this isn't a novel, but a graphic book to connect with kids, but also like, what is it about mental health and this medium that you think is so powerful?
Yeah, it really does collaborate in a beautiful way, mental health and comic books. And I found it myself before I really started making my own comics. There were certain cartoonists that I would read. One's named John Porcellino. He would do these autobio memoir comics about his life. And he talked about his OCD. And I couldn't believe how honest and beautiful it was and how the simplicity of it and how easy it was to read and probably harder to say out loud, really, like those experiences, something about the image and the picture. But I think like, if you think about comic books, we have thought bubbles in comics. You can literally see into thoughts, which like maybe you can't even really do in a movie. You might have a voiceover or something, but you can have this dualistic, I speak one thing, I think another, I say I'm fine, I'm not fine. And you can also have these beautiful metaphors for feelings and internal experiences. You can create creatures or various characters to represent your anxiety or your fears or your frustrations. And kids get that. They're like, oh, the Incredible Hulk, like that's the anger persona of like exploding feelings. So it's always been there. But like, I think there's this movement called graphic medicine that's like doctors and patients and educators and academics that are using the format of comics to heal or to explain, or, if I'm a surgeon and I'm going to do surgery on you, I want to show you like what part of your body and like what you might feel before. And if I'm a patient, I might say, you're a doctor I'm meeting for the first time. I want to show you my history of the things I've gone through. So there's a movement of this. And I discovered it as I was stepping into it just intuitively. There's a lot of people working in this art of comics to communicate and help others in many ways. But I really love that.
That's so cool. I want to talk also about the subject matter. So you were a teacher. How long has it been since you were a teacher? And I'm kind of curious how you stay on the pulse of what's happening with the teens and adolescents.
Yeah, I didn't know I was really leaving teaching. I kind of told myself I would leave for 1 year, and that was in 2018, before the pandemic. And I left. And as I started this book, I realized what a huge project I had sold the idea of it before I'd actually written a manuscript, and I had to learn. And I'm really glad I did, actually, because I had beautiful support and wonderful people helping to guide me. I think by myself, I don't know that I could have done it. I was outside the classroom when the pandemic happened, and I was seeing what my friends were going through and everyone's families were going through, and the need for mental health resources was like shooting through the roof. It already was, but it was like so much more so. But it just it takes a long time to draw a graphic novel. Like it's hours of sitting and sketching, and then you're coloring it, and there's all these edits, and it's a lot of steps. It's not just like typing. It wasn't until 2024 that the book actually came out. And so now, just in the last couple of months, I've visited some schools and I've met with some kids. And so that's been exciting to see how it lands, because I was a bit nervous that it took me so long to make, and I wasn't the same teacher person I was beforehand, and the world had changed so much. But at the end of the day, like, we all have brains and nervous systems and feelings, and that will always be there no matter what's going on in the world. And kids have been receptive. I was afraid that maybe it would be too much science or too much vocabulary in the book, and that doesn't seem to bother them. And I got like one really funny email from a little girl who, it really made me feel good, because she was just completely friendly with me, as if we were buddies already, and she felt that way, I hope, because of the book. And she wasn't focused on the heavier information in the book. She liked that there was talk of feelings and how her brain was changing as she was getting older, but she was like cracking jokes with me, and that just made me feel so, because I was so worried about, there's so many things to be worried about when you make a book like this. Is it accurate? Is it good? Is it helpful? Is it the right thing? Is it in the right order of how to say it? But at the end of the day, it's how the kids, for me, that's the real test, is if they accept the book and if it's helpful to them. It's only been out about 2 months when I'm starting to get those messages that I know are coming straight from them, and not because someone asked them to write it, or a teacher asked. So that's, for me, the real proof in the pudding. It's a intense world that we live in, and with the internet and all of the stimuli that we have, and the childhoods of our kids today are so much different from our own. I would probably want to team up with like a 13-year-old and illustrate their thoughts on what that's like. But there are certain things that I just wished I'd known as a kid. And there's so much great science communication now, and so much understanding about our brains that is more readily available. But I hadn't really seen it in a comic book, so I wanted to see what that would be like.
Yeah, that's great. A couple of things that just came up as you were talking. One is I just interviewed Ellen Galinsky, who wrote a wonderful book called The Breakthrough Years. So I'm recommending it for you, and also listeners, make sure you listen to that episode. She spent 10 years researching with teenagers about what they want people to know about their experience. And I think that is connected to what you were saying too, how powerful it could be to like sit down with teens and find out what's going on in their inner world. Just before we pivot to getting more into the book, there's been so much discussion lately about the mental health crisis, and Jonathan Haidt has his book out on anxious generation. And there's just so much discussion and people trying to figure out what's really going on. And you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on it.
I know. I mean, I think I'm just watching like everybody else, and I can really only go by probably my nieces and nephews and like my friends. I don't have kids, so like the kids that are closest to me, and they're pretty awesome. I don't know, like I'm impressed with them, but I also have a heavy heart about it because I feel like, oh, we escaped this. There's a lot more trapdoors, it feels like, in the world, and a lot more fear because of all of the information that's coming out, and they seem to still find connection and meaning and fun. So maybe it's going to be okay. Like I don't have like a strong answer. I'm very much a feeling person, and maybe I'm a bit of an optimist too. So I'm kind of hoping that they're figuring it out. And I even had a conversation with like a college student recently, and that was like in their 20s. And they were talking about, they really want to talk about generations. And I guess I'm Generation X. And I was like, oh, I don't get into this like generational talk as much, but they're really into it. And I said, well, the only thing I can think of is I don't like to be on my phone during a conversation. And that feels different because I'm older. And they said, well, we're changing. We're not doing that as much. And I was like, well, that's great. So I feel like things are shifting and changing, and they're aware of when it gets to be too much. And they're watching too. Yeah, I guess I don't have a good answer, but I'm watching.
There's no good or right answer. I'm just curious, but I agree with you. I think I'm so impressed with this generation in so many ways. And I think that your book is really respectful and generous in the way that it shares really complex topics. We'll take a quick break and then let's talk more about your book when we get back. As a longtime runner, hydration is something I've always had to consider, especially in the hot, humid summers of New York. But staying hydrated is important for everyone, and it's not just about drinking water. Being optimally hydrated means optimizing your body's fluid ratios, including electrolytes. In fact, electrolyte deficiency or imbalance can cause headaches, cramps, fatigue, brain fog, and weakness. Element is a zero-sugar electrolyte drink mix designed for better hydration. Each pack provides a strong dose of electrolytes without any sugar or artificial colors or any other dodgy ingredients. And while Element is found in enthusiastic community in everyone from Olympic athletes to special forces to functional nutrition experts, it's also perfect for moms, your everyday exercise enthusiasts like me, folks who are fasting or those following keto, low-carb, whole food diets, really anyone on a mission to restore health through hydration. Element's formula was created with a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium. And again, no sugar. And because I'm a researcher, I wanted to better understand the benefits of having optimal electrolyte levels. And there are so many, including reducing muscle cramps, promoting better sleep, and supporting better digestion, just to name a few. Get your free Element sample pack with any purchase at drinklmnt.com/tilt. Also, try the new Element Sparkling, a bold 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water. There are a lot of moving pieces and big transitions happening in my world, and I'm finding myself really relying on my routines these days. Because when there are so many changes happening that are beyond my control, consistency in a few aspects of my life has been absolutely critical. That's one of the reasons why I like Ritual's Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement with clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome, as it's become a regular part of my morning routine. One minty capsule first thing while sitting down with my laptop, and I can get on with my day knowing that I'm doing something just for me and my well-being. And the capsule itself is a delayed release, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, which is exactly where we want it to go. But there's a lot more I like about Ritual too. As a company, they're committed to sustainability, using scientific tools to select lower carbon packaging, prioritize sustainably sourced ingredients, and set ambitious climate goals. And they're a female-founded B Corp, meaning they are holding themselves accountable long-term to not only think about their company's financial health, but also the health of people and our planet. I love all of that. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. When it comes to our kids' education, there is no one-size-fits-all approach. We often have to pivot and get curious about how to best set our kids up for being lifelong learners, which means being nimble enough to find learning opportunities that are best for them and their unique learning styles. If you relate, K-12 should be on your radar, as it can help your child start reaching their full potential in life now and give you the support you need to get them there. K-12 powered schools are tuition-free online accredited public schools for kindergarten through 12th grade, designed to help your child to learn at their own pace, in their own place, all with an engaging curriculum that supports individual learning styles. To be clear, this is different from homeschooling where you're responsible for teaching them. K-12 powered schools' state certified teachers are trained online educators. They utilize hands-on innovative technology to make learning interactive. K-12 has more than 20 years experience helping students gain the skills they truly need to thrive in the future, and it just might be the perfect fit for your child too. K-12 powered schools even offer social opportunities, extracurricular activities, and in-person events. Join the more than 2 million families who have been served by K-12 and empower your students to reach their full potential now. Go to k12.com/tilt today to learn more and find a tuition-free K-12 powered school near you. That's the letter K, the number 12.com/tilt, k12.com/tilt. You mentioned earlier, your book is called Here I Am Me, an illustrated guide to mental health. It's great. I just have to even say, it feels really good in your hands. It's color. It's got great paper stock. I love the sensory experience of your book. But I love that as soon as you open the book, inside the front cover, so you're not even in the book yet, you dive right in by sharing an illustration of the parts of the brain in this very kind of fun and accessible way. And then, of course, you have a whole chapter on the brain later on where you go into a lot of detail, but again, in a very accessible way. So I want to know more about that. Why was it so important to you to include the brain science in there?
There were a couple of things when I proposed this book that I knew I wanted to be in there. And one was the brain. I wanted to look inside the brain. I wanted to, have just like a simple understanding of brain anatomy and how it affects our emotional health. And then I also knew that there had to be a chapter about suicide. And those are the two things that I was like, my non-negotiables. This is what's going to be in that. And then as I started researching the brain and reading everything about the brain, oh my gosh, that probably took just a couple of years of just being like, what can I actually say? There's so much research and so much going on, and what's good for a kid to know? What's good for me to know? And where do I stop? And how deep do I go? And because I'm a cartoonist, I'm looking for metaphors and characters everywhere all the time. And so I kind of found the characters in the brain. And I realized as I researched different topics like anxiety and depression and addiction that certain characters kept coming back. You're going to keep hearing about your hippocampus and your amygdala keeps showing up, and you're going to hear about your prefrontal cortex over and over. And so I thought, well, they're going to keep coming back. They're characters. And then, that's the fun part for me is figuring out the sort of mind puppets of my little drawing puppets. I'm giving myself freedom to kind of make up what they look like a little bit because it's just a brain. I'm going to give them different colors. Some of them are wearing glasses. Some of them have facial expressions or one eye or two eyes. So that helped me organize how to even create the book and how to use the brain in a way that's helpful enough to get you through a moment. Because I think when you can recognize I'm having a reaction, that's the biggest thing to help you get past that reaction is even knowing that you're having a reaction. So probably spent maybe 2 years just writing that brain chapter, the first one, and the intro to the book also. It took me a long time to put myself in the book. I didn't want to be in the book, and it only works if I'm in the book. So that was a big, I'm a Bean. My last name is Bean. And my students would call me Ms. Bean. So I would always sign Beans, everything Beans. So that's part of the book. And so you've got this Bean telling you things, and you've got your brain and all the brain characters. And you also have another reoccurring character, which is Stigma, which is a monster. And I make this creature for when we don't want to speak about things, or we're made to feel bad, or we feel bad about something. That character kind of creeps up in different topics when we get a little nervous to ask for help or speak our truth and kind of admit something that's not right.
Yeah. And you mentioned yourself as a character in the book. And so it's interesting to hear that was something you knew had to be in there, but you didn't want to put in there. And you kind of share some stories from your life. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. You brought it up, so let's talk about it.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, because it was a battle for me to get there. And if anyone out there is a teacher or talks to groups of people at any time, when you share a personal story that's like off topic, you've got their attention so much more than when you're trying to give like the information at hand. Like I would notice that in the classroom, like, okay, we're studying, observational drawing, or we're going to make a sculpture. But if I tell them about this puppy that I found on the way to school and I had to figure out what to do with it, and I've got their hanging on my every word because they're like, I'm telling them about something outside real about my life and it's a true thing that just happened. And so I knew I wanted to have a connection moment in almost every chapter. And I call them the pink pages, but they're in the hippocampus is the part of your brain associated with memory. And so that they're the hippocampus pink pages. And I would just kind of have a memory or a thought and I would illustrate it. And it's a true story. And some of them are funny and some of them are serious, depending on what we're talking about. And I know that when I would read nonfiction, and I loved nonfiction as a kid. So this book is like kind of the book I wanted as a kid. I loved the true stories of people's lives. Like I wanted to like flip through and read all of the actual true stories. And then I could go back and like take in the information if I cared or if I was interested, but I needed that grounding. I didn't know that when I first began the book, but I realized it was kind of, as you make a book, the book has rules for you. And it kind of tells you like, okay, each chapter must have a personal story. There should be a map for every chapter of questions. And like, so that's going to happen. And then little by little, it organizes itself, not clearly, for me, very slowly over time.
Well, just to go back to the stories too, they also create this kind of credibility for you and that you have lived experience. So it's worth listening to what you have to say. So I thought they were really powerful and a really important part of the book. And it's also just really interesting to hear how you organized it. I think, it's like, oh, it's a illustrated book, graphic drawings. Like you spent years thinking about this. And I love getting these little glimpses of just the maps you had inside your brain of how to organize and the themes, even color-wise, that are present throughout the book. So I just so appreciate how thorough and thoughtful this whole process has been for you.
Before I made this book, I would just make comics for fun. I just made comics about my life or funny stories or experimental comics. When I wasn't teaching, like it was my art form. And I found that not intentionally, when I look back at them now, so many of my stories were about anxiety. And the like climax is me having a super embarrassing moment, which is usually really funny, or I completely freak out about something that is not a big deal actually, but I didn't know that at the time. And I was like, oh, these are all about my anxiety. But I was not consciously doing that. So it was nice to take a step into this book where I was very conscious, like sharing these stories to show like, my humanity and my struggles as well. And how all these topics connect to each one of us. And that like, you don't have to be a mental health professional to have mental health conversations. And any one of us could be the person that someone turns to, just like I was as the art teacher. And you could be the coach, you could just be the aunt or uncle, you could be the parent, you could be anybody. And are you ready for that? Do you feel prepared to guide someone in the right direction? And that was hope that comes through in the book, that it's for kids, but it's also for any of us that kind of wants that little bit of like reassurance and good information. Yeah.
I'm glad you said that because it is a book that certainly I think so many teens, adolescents would really get so much out of. I think it's written for ages 12 and up is how it's marketed. But yes, it's certainly a book that any parent, adult who works with kids, teacher, therapist would get so much out of because you do offer a way to talk about some really challenging and difficult topics in a way that feels comfortable is not the word, but it feels doable. I think we can get paralyzed with some of the heavier topics. And let's actually take a break. And then I want to talk about some of those chapters and towards the end of the book that do address some more serious issues.
Making everyone happy on vacation isn't easy, but you know what is? Going to Aruba. All you have to do is walk out your door to find pristine pools, relaxing white sand beaches, and an island teeming with outdoor activities that'll put a smile on any face. You won't just feel great, you'll all feel great, filled with a calmer, more peaceful vibe that radiates Aruba's warmth. And the best part is, it never fades. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your family trip at Aruba.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
This is the moment.
The Bachelorette is back. Yeah! And the power
I'm gonna fall in love.
is in Jen's hands.
And I'm gonna do it my way.
ABC tonight.
Everything about her is great.
I feel so special.
Jen's looking like a queen.
My men are very, very hot.
Someone call 911. You are looking so fired.
This is the beginning of a new era.
The Bachelorette. All new tonight, 8/7 Central on ABC. And stream on Hulu.
Your whole book tackles all the things, right? You talk about anxiety, you talk about depression, you talk about cognitive distortions. You really kind of cover all the different kinds of mental health challenges that not just a young person, that a human could experience. And you have a chapter on substance use and addiction I thought was really powerful. Could we talk about that a little bit? I'd love to know how you went about approaching that subject.
Yeah. So up until that point in the book, things are pretty fun and light and airy. Like we learn about the brain and we learn that we all have a mind and we learn about our nervous system, but we can laugh about that. But once you get into substance use and addiction, that's where the book kind of takes a darker turn and the conversation gets a lot heavier. And this is a topic that's very strong in my own family, and I share that in the book. There is plenty of addiction and substance use in my family, and that was the thing I was dying to have someone talk to me about when I was a kid, and nobody was. So that part really was a hard chapter for me to write. If anyone out there is a fan of Bill Watterson and Calvin and Hobbes, I loved that comic as a kid, and he's a very private person, and he doesn't write. I don't think he writes about substance use and addiction, but one thing he does do is he talks about philosophy a lot of times in his comics, like heavy topics sometimes. And he, in the one interview, said that that's when he would put Calvin and Hobbes on a sled or the roller coaster. They would be really moving, like there'd be action because the subject matter was so heavy. And so that chapter, each chapter has a kind of metaphor location in the book. And the substance use and addiction chapter is located in an amusement park because it's a dopamine fest. There's sugar and there's, rides, and like it's really easy to take that stuff into talking about drugs and alcohol and behavioral compulsion. So that's how I handled it. I took a page out of Calvin and Hobbes and I just put that first roller coaster ride is where you really learn what drugs can do to you. It can kill you. It can all the different ways they can damage you. And I just thought, okay, well, we're just going to zip through the information and hopefully that lands. And then what's nice in a comic too is you can take a visual break after something heavy. And I love, my favorite cartoonists will do this. Like, you'll have this fight scene or you'll have this like big reveal of something terrible that happened. But then you can have like a page where it's just like a meadow or a sunset and you can kind of take a beat before you get into the next topic. And I felt like I was able to do that a little bit in that chapter. And then for me, having a family member that was an alcoholic, I liked the tilt-a-whirl as the metaphor for when you love somebody that has a addiction and they don't want to get off the ride and you desperately want them to get off the ride. And maybe you're on the ride with them for a little bit and then you go, I can't do this and I have to get off the ride with you. And I hope that you get off the ride too, but I can't control that. So like, finding those metaphors for me, I wouldn't find them right away. I would have to kind of search and doodle and draw in my sketchbook and sit on the floor. And but once I found them, I was like, oh, okay, I've got it. Like, this is a way I can explain it. On the pink pages from that chapter have a cousin who passed away from an overdose. And I was really nervous about putting that in the book. But I think it's really important that everybody knows that this affects families and affects many members of families, and everybody, whether they're talking about it or not, is like affected by it. And even if it's not you personally or even someone really close to you, it is affecting all of us. And it's good to kind of to remind each other,
Yeah. And I was thinking of Jess Leahy's book, The Addiction Inoculation. We talked to Jess about that on the show as well. And I think that book and this chapter and just what we're talking about is a reminder that we have to talk about these things. I think there's a lot of fear in some adults that, well, we don't want to explain this stuff in too much detail to our kids because it might make them more interested in. I mean, the same goes with really any serious subject. Let's avoid it, not talk about it. But it's so important that they have access to really good, solid information because they're curious and we want them to learn about the stuff from good sources.
Right. Yeah. And like in a comic, you can say one thing in the words and show something else in the pictures. So even though we're talking about these heavy and dangerous drugs, you're not seeing pictures of them. You're not even learning what they look like. Like the picture is just the amusement park. It's the voice speaking to you that's telling you about things. So I think there's a little bit of a safety that you can put on that where you can control how much you show and the way that you juxtapose it with imagery in the comic. So I hadn't thought about that till you just said that.
Yeah. That's cool. I do want to touch upon the chapter on depression. Suicide was, I would say, even more, it comes after, it's even more intense. It's hard to read about. I think it's hard for anyone just knowing that so many kids are struggling right now with this. And I imagine it was really hard for you to write about. And I would love if you could talk a little bit also about how you approached that chapter, because it's, again, such an important topic that a lot of people don't know how to even bring up or explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was afraid to talk about it too, especially as a teacher in the beginning. Like I noticed the guidance counselors would just ask a kid and it's like, how do you do that? So when I started attending those workshops and trainings, what I would hear from professionals is talking about it is not a bad thing. And it actually can be a huge relief to someone who is hearing these thoughts and maybe wants someone to help them through it. So it's really great if they know that they can talk to somebody, remove some of the burden of it. I made this little zine called Snake Pit. It's on my website. You can still read it. But I just drew what I was learning about suicide and suicidal thoughts and ideation. It was the perspective of an adult, like how do you talk to a kid? I used actually a lot of the same metaphors. I used a cliff, being on the edge of something. I kept all of that because I feel like it worked. But I just kind of shifted the conversation in the book with the help of a really wonderful therapist named Michael Safranak, who makes another appearance in the book later as a therapist. But he sat with me. I was really nervous about those chapters. And it was during the pandemic when I was working on them. So I was very isolated. And I Zoomed with him and a few other artists. And we drew metaphors for depression. And I talked through okay, well, this is how I want it to be in the book. But what order should I say this? And we kind of decided it might be really nice to focus on whether if you're the friend, if you're the family member or hearing person that someone else comes to, what do you do? Let's go through that first, and then once we get through that and also let's take care of you. How do you feel after that? That is a lot, let's take a moment to kind of appreciate what you handled something really heavy. And then, okay, well, what if it's ever you? Then what do you do? And so it was very gently, lovingly, carefully laid out, and probably one of the scarier things I've done as an artist. But I had it read by many, many people too, because I was very nervous about it. I want to make sure I help her, And then, the depression chapter comes before the suicide chapter because those aren't always together. Some people that don't have depression might have an impulsive act. So we learn about depression, and it's kind of that metaphor for that landscape is like a moon-like desert, not a lot of plant life, boulders and pits, and you're at a place where you can feel stuck or slowed down, and it's kind of a blue color. And then when we transition to the chapter about suicidal thoughts and suicide, it gets even more gray, and we're really keep seeing that landscape of the cliff, the edge. I'm stuck. This is the only thing. And how can you help somebody or help yourself through that? And it's not a lot of pages, but they were really, really carefully composed pages with many hearts and eyes reading them and taking it in. So I'm proud of those pages, but they were hard. It was hard to do. Yeah,
I bet. But so important. And I'm glad you mentioned the snake pit. I read that earlier, and I think it's such a helpful resource. I'll have a link to that in the show notes too for readers. If you are an adult or a therapist who's working with teens who are in this place, I thought it was fantastic. So great resource. There's a lot more we could go into. You talk about coping skills, you talk about therapy. It feels really comprehensive when looking at the landscape of mental health for young people. As a way to kind of wrap up, you mentioned some of the feedback you've gotten from young people and how great that is. What do you hope the book does in the world?
I hope it encourages conversations. I hope that it's like on people's shelves. It's a resource. It's not, meant to be like this book that you blow through. You just kind of like have it there. And, when something happens where you go, oh, like now I'm kind of in that situation. I remember there was kind of a chapter about that. It didn't appeal to me at the time, but maybe let's go back and read it. Or, I've got a young person in my life that I care about. And like, we're both going to read this book and then we can have a bit of a chat about it. Or I would love for it to be a tool for either the kid or the adult to kind of bridge the gap between like, how do we talk about some of these things? Yeah, that would be a dream. I would love if it just created connection.
That's wonderful. So listeners, the book again is called Here I Am Me, an illustrated guide to mental health. And Cara, tell us where listeners can connect with you and learn more about your work.
Oh, yeah. You can come to my website. It's called carabeancomics.com. And yeah, I do drawing workshops. I'm really still an art teacher. I love to make people draw with me and feel our feelings when they come up when we draw together. And I've just started to do some school visits. I love to highlight the wellness team of a particular place and how people can give them some love and focus on them a bit. You maybe use my book to help bring attention to what people are doing in different communities. I'll be out there in the world, but you can find me at my website.
That's awesome. Thank you. Listeners, as always, I will have links to everything in the show notes page. And Cara, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and congratulations. I really think your book is such a fantastic resource. So it's wonderful you got it out into the world.
Thank you, Debbie. I appreciate you having me on your podcast and letting me be a part of your platform where you're helping so many people. So I appreciate you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at Tilt Parenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Oh, hey, everybody. It's us, Blair and Molly, your old pals from Toddler Purgatory. Two moms who are also actors, who are also creative beings, who sometimes feel stuck. And this is our new podcast, Unsticking It with Blair and Molly. What happens when your creative spark just seems to disappear? Gone. Poof. Bye. See ya. What happens when life gets in the way of your creativity instead of nourishing it? That's what happened to Molly and me. We felt like the thing that drove us creatively stopped working, and impending doom had in fact impended. Totally. So we decided to do something about it. And that was steal ideas about getting unstuck from the most creative people we can find. We talk to guests about how to break through the mucky, gluey, sticky wall that can get between you and your creativity. We hear about their journeys, their successes, their challenges, and even their bougie coffee shop orders. And we're not just talking Bob Ross type paint on paper artists here, though we talk to them too. We're talking to actors, creative directors, dancers, and people who are working hard to be their best creative selves in a world that can sometimes feel real uncreative.
We all have something to teach each other, so let's steal their ideas together.
Join us, won't you, as we deep dive into how to unstick ourselves from the life gunk that can get in the way of our creative freedom. Pandemics, school calendars,
World events, lack of sleep. Oh, get out of their life gunk.
and let's get back to your best creative self. Subscribe to Unsticking It with Blair and Molly.
You're not going to want to miss an episode.
Unsticking It with Blair and Molly, because sometimes life sucks.
Unsticking